Hi everyone, this is Debbie Vornholt with Common Sense Landlording. Welcome. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about a lease and how important it is to have a very solid and detailed lease with every tenant that is in your property. Remember, your lease is a legally binding contract, so whatever is in it, you can take to court and have enforced. It should name all parties who are going to be living in the property. It should list the lease terms. It should list what happens, for example, when the lease ends. Does it go month to month? Does it renew automatically on an annual basis? Doesn't matter, but as long as you specify that. It should list how much the rent is, what the security deposit is, what the late fees are. If you do a renewal, I would put in a renewal, how much it costs to renew the lease, have an annual increase or a lease term increase so that you are at least increasing the rent to kind of help with the cost of, everything, the cost of everything improving. And with a great tenant, you are most likely never going to even have to look at your lease. The tenant will move in, pay the rent, do what they're supposed to do, and you'll never have to even look at the lease. The problem gets to be when you have issues, you're going to want that lease. Always be sure it's a written lease too, or I like the computer generated leases. Every so often I run across a landlord who said, yeah, no, we just did a verbal lease. And that is more common than you think. Don't ever do that because you can't really take that to court. You need a written lease. I personally don't like a lease that's like a blank template. I run across them all the time where the landlord will actually handwrite in all of the terms. You need to be careful doing that because if you're doing that on the fly, you don't have a lot of time to review that. There could be mistakes. You could leave a tenant off. You could do the math wrong and put the wrong security deposit down or something. So I am a big fan of doing it ahead of time, having it completely filled out, and then going over it with the tenant when you sign the lease. So always be sure in your area, and I would get copies of leases from maybe other property managers, other people in the area, and see what kind of clauses they have, because every area is a little different. And always have an attorney review your lease so that you make sure that you don't have anything illegal in there. You always want to have clauses that are enforceable, that if you take it to court, the judge doesn't say, what do you mean this isn't even enforceable here in this area? And as time passes, if you've been in this business for a long time, your lease may be very old. Did you have a bed bug clause? I went through ours several years ago and realized we didn't have a bed bug clause. So you never know. You may assume that you have certain clauses in there and you may have just forgotten that you don't have them in there. So always review those. And for example, years ago, cable wasn't a big thing. A lot of people didn't have cable or dishes. What happens when now your tenant wants to put in cable or have a dish installed on the roof? I cannot tell you how many problems we've had when they go up on the roof and they attach those things. The roof leaks, there's all kinds of problems. And when they leave, they don't remove them. Every so often, you'll go by houses, watch it when you're out driving around. You can sometimes see 3, 4, 5, 6 dishes on a house, and it's not even a very big house. And when they remove those, they can cause roof leaks. So who takes care of the cost of that? If you don't address it in your lease, guess who's going to be paying for that? You, not your tenant. So the other issue that I really think you ought to consider is, how are payments applied in your lease? For example, let's say your rent is $1,000. Your tenant has accrued $200 in late fees. They had a plumbing bill that you charged them for $100, and those are still unpaid on the tenant ledger. So when the tenant pays the rent the next month, do you just apply that $1,000 to the rent, or do you do what I do and take part of that rent money and pay off the late fees and the plumbing bill, and then what's left is rent? Remember, you cannot evict someone for unpaid late charges or for unpaid bills. You can evict them for unpaid rent. So make sure that your lease specifies that any monies that come in are applied towards all other fees before the rent. That way, if you get into a situation where your tenant is just refusing to pay these fees, you can actually file an eviction against them and basically give them a wake-up call and say, hey, pay this is rent. And they're probably going to argue with them. And as long as it's in the lease, there's nothing they can do about it. Another common issue that you're going to run across that you need to have addressed in the lease is what happens when you find out someone else has moved in. And this is actually pretty common. So you need to have a clause in your lease that specifies how long someone can stay without being considered as residing in the property. Is it 3 days? Is it 5 days? Is it 2 weeks, a month? Whatever it is, it makes no difference. But you need to have that spelled out. So if you find out there's 3, 4, 5, 6 extra people living in the house, I found out one time a whole family had moved in the basement of one of our rental properties, and they had 6 mattresses down there. These people had lost their homes and the whole family had moved in. And the plumber tipped me to that. I sent them a cease and desist and said, look, there are only 3 people on this lease and you have all these other people living in the house. They have to go. They can't be there. So they did get them to move out, but luckily my plumber told me, because you can't have that many people living. It was a 3-bedroom, 1-bath house with an unfinished basement. So it was just a mess. But my point is with this is that a well-written lease is going to protect you and it will protect the tenant. So be sure that you have the appropriate clauses that you need. It might be 5 pages, it might be 6 pages. I think my lease right now is like 8 pages, but I also have the lead-based paint in there. I have all of these clauses in there. And as you experience different things in your rental business, you need to add different clauses to address those things. So your lease is your line of defense when your tenant is behaving badly, when they're not paying the rent, when they are parking in the yard and they're not supposed to, when they move in too many people, when they are having wild parties, if they are dealing drugs, all sorts of things that your lease will protect you from. Now, obviously you have to take them to court and you will have to follow the legal process. But if you don't have a clause that covers all of these wild card things, you're going to be left standing there hopelessly watching your tenant get away with all of these things. So those are my thoughts on leases and the different clauses that you need to have. Be sure and consult with an attorney, because I'm not an attorney. I'd love to know what your thoughts are. Maybe you've had something that happened that wasn't covered in your lease. How did you handle it? I always love to hear from you all. You can touch base with me at commonsenselandlording.com. Thanks for listening and have a great day.